Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Novel Strip Show, where I talk about books and comics. And this is part 3 of my September 2018 wrap up. If you haven't seen the first two parts, please do go and watch those. I'll put links up to them. And what I'm doing is talking about the books that I read in September 2018. So we've got two more books to go. So the first one was Lord of the Flies by William Golding. So this was another one that I listened to just on audiobook. I had previously read it when I was in year 9, I think it was, at school. So it'd been, a good 10 years at least, if not longer, since I read it. So I thought I'd re-listen to it, but knowing the basic story, etc., I listened to it on audiobook. So for a basic summary, it's basically a story about a group of kind of preteen to teenage boys who land on an island and have to survive alone until they can be rescued. So in terms of what I thought, I really enjoyed this. I kind of obviously remembered little bits as we were going through, and there are plenty of bits, so to be honest, that I didn't remember. But I think the characters were all they were obviously young. Most of them are kind of sort of children age. That would normally annoy me because I'm not a fan of YA, and in general, even in kind of things targeted towards an older audience, kids annoy me. That's kind of general in life, really. Kids annoy me. Despite that, that would normally annoy me. The fact that they all are quite young, they're all really well developed as characters, and I was able to imagine them really quite vividly. I think a good part of that was due to Martin Jarvis's narration, because Piggy, for example, sounded exactly as I pictured him, kind of remembering back to when I was in school reading the book, how I thought he might sound. It was kind of exactly as Martin Jarvis made him sound. So there was definite distinction, he definitely changed his voice quite a lot for all of the different characters, and I think that just added to it for me. It made me able to see them and imagine them as characters even more vividly than if I'd been reading the book. That definitely helped. I think in terms of the plot and everything as well, it was really compelling. It definitely reminded me of my own adolescence a lot, which a lot of YA doesn't, and that's part of the reason why I think I don't enjoy it and I don't like it. It just seems completely fake and false to me. It's not the experience that I had at all. People, when they think about adolescence, they often reference Catcher in the Rye. I would say Lord of the Flies is probably a bit before that, kind of Catcher in the Rye. Holden Caulfield's a bit older than the characters in Lord of the Flies are. But even so, I could never ever identify with Holden from Catcher in the Rye. Whereas with the Lord of the Flies, I was just like, I could see myself in that situation as a kind of 12-year-old or so. Even though those memories of my adolescence weren't the most pleasant, it definitely made everything seem all the more realistic to me. And they were, very emotional and shocking moments. Lots of violence as well. So if you're not keen on that, maybe don't read it, or at least be aware going in. But it definitely made me reflect on how I would have acted in that situation at that age. It made me think a lot about kind of human nature. It'd be interesting to see how adults would react in that situation. Would they be any better? Would they be any worse? To be honest, I think that's thinking of that, it made me realise that there are loads of similarities between Lord of the Flies and Lost, even more than I'd kind of picked up on when I was watching the show. And I guess it almost is like what would happen if adults were put in that situation. Albeit kind of in Lost, they kind of say things are the sort of fantasy element is portrayed as being very real, whereas in Lord of the Flies it's very much there are these things that people perceive, but it's not very clear. It's almost a bit like magic realism. It's not really clear if it's actually magic or if it's just there in their head, just in their imagination. So I really liked that aspect of it as well. It definitely gave me a lot to think about. One other thing that I found was quite interesting, if unexpected, was kind of how homoerotic it was. Maybe that's just because I'm older and have a dirtier mind now, but there were definitely times when I was like, I don't know if I should be reading this, when they're only 12 or so. Um, I think it's interesting to consider, during the time period when it was written, homosexuality was still illegal. Don't know if that had a part to play in it as well, but yeah, it was just kind of another aspect to it that I thought was worth mentioning. Overall, though, I'd say because of how well I could envisage the characters, and because of how much it made me think about human nature and how I might react, or how adults react, or how people react in general, given the situation, but also kind of um, in the world and in life, and how we treat people. Because of that, I really enjoyed it and gave it 5 out of 5 stars. So yeah, would highly recommend it. So the final book then that I read in September, I actually didn't finish reading it until about a week or so ago, so it did go on into October, but I started it in September, so I'll count it here, was The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. So this basically is a story narrated by Death, and he tells the story of a young German girl who grows up during the time of like the Nazis and just kind of during World War One. So yeah, in terms of what I thought about it, I'm quite sorry to say I really didn't enjoy the book. I know that's a very unpopular opinion. I really wanted to enjoy it. I know so many people did. I think everyone I'm friends with on Goodreads, who's read the book has rated it 4 or 5 stars at least. I gave it a rating of 2. So my main problem is that right from the start, everything's narrated by Death, and in fact, since Holden Caulfield, he has the most annoying narrative voice that I've ever experienced. So firstly, there's constant use of colloquialisms, and that really bugs me because, as I kind of mentioned a bit, in my review of Norse gods, in I think it was the first part of this video, I don't like that. It takes it out of its world for me. If it's to develop a character or a person's unique narrative voice to play with the idea of like an unreliable narrator or something like that, then that's absolutely fine. I get that, and I appreciate that. But the whole point is that Death isn't a character. He's just the narrator. We see everything through his eyes, but he's meant to be this being who's detached. He's not part of our world. He's not part of the human world. So why on earth would he speak like someone from our world who uses, slang and everything? Obviously, I'm not going to want it written in a kind of unique language that I'm not going to understand at all. But I think that language, if he's meant to be this all-seeing, omnipotent being who's not part of our world, I just want his language to be as neutral as possible. The use of slang or colloquialisms just makes it impossible to believe that he is this eternal, omnipotent being that's not part of the human world. So next up was the just the way in which everything was written. I feel like the writer, the author, Markus Zusak, had just kind of taken a creative writing class, so he wanted to throw in as many similes and metaphors as possible, but it just made it completely ridiculous, I think. Really hackneyed and cliched. Here's actually an example. I don't normally read out quotes, but I think this kind of illustrates my point. This is from page 12 of the edition of the book that I have. So yeah, the last time I saw her was red. The sky was like soup boiling and stirring. In some places, it was burned. There were black crumbs and pepper streaked across the redness. Earlier, kids had been playing hopscotch there on the street that looks like oil-stained pages. When I arrived, I could hear the echoes, the feet tapping the road, the children voices laughing, their smiles like salt but decaying fast. Then bombs. It goes on, then the sirens, the cuckoo shrieks on the radio, all too late. The streets were ruptured veins, blood streamed till it was dried on the road, the bodies were stuck there like driftwood after the flood. Basically the whole book is written like that. Like, how many bloody metaphors do you need, seriously, in one page? Like, it's too much. It just is incredibly trite. And yeah, so that really, really annoyed me. I found it incredibly distracting, and because of that, I didn't connect to any of the characters. I didn't connect to anything that was going on. I just didn't care because it was just so cliched. Um, the other thing is that death points everything out. So anything that might have been profound, if been allowed to go away and think about it for myself and reflect on it, was completely ruined because death was basically there the whole time being like, this is really profound and you should be really sad at this moment because of X, Y, and Z. So this may be symptomatic of the fact that it is a book targeted towards young adults or perhaps even children. And as we all know, I'm not, in general, a fan of that. But the reason I'm not a fan of it is because I think young readers, young adults, should be given more credit. They have the capacity to think about things themselves. I mean, my friend's head of English, she's a teacher, and she's teaching kids in year 7, so aged 11, Chaucer and things like that, and they're perfectly capable of understanding it, even though it's in translation kind of, or it's modernized, but they're capable of understanding these complex ideas. They don't need to be told everything. And yeah, that it just really annoyed me because I think it's dumbing things down and patronizing the audience. Now the other thing is, there's a few illustrations in the book, and that's fine. I mean, obviously I talked about Wanderlust in, I think it was part 2, and I absolutely love Wanderlust because the illustrations were there for a reason. Here it just seems like it's kind of maybe an afterthought. It just seems very kind of like they're thrown in to the point where it doesn't seem planned, to the point where there are some illustrations where there's text as part of the illustration. Things have words written on them, and they're printed so small that you can't even read the text. So what's the point? That really frustrated me. There's also another thing that annoyed me is that there's a lot of swearing, but it's done in German. So again, it just feels really trite to me. It feels really kind of forced and unnecessary. In the Demon Cycle that I'm reading currently, for example, there are plenty of words in Crassian. So Crassian's a made-up language, but the words that are used, they're kind of explained once and then they're just used. And it adds something. It's because there isn't a kind of direct thing that we have in our culture, therefore this word is invented and it's used, and it makes it feel as though it's just part of that culture. It's always done for a reason. That's an example of how to do it well. But in the Book Thief, there's just random words in German thrown in. A lot of the time they're explained kind of, there'll be a word in German, then immediately afterwards it's explained in English. And there is absolutely no reason not to just use the English word. It doesn't add anything to it, other than to just be like, oh, hey, I'm the author, I know some German. Like that, what does that give me as a reader? Nothing. It just makes me aware of the author. And again, as I discussed earlier in this series, that really frustrates me because the author to me is secondary to the text. If I'm interested in a text, I might then want to go and find out about the author, but I don't want to have them as part of the text. I don't want to feel their presence in the text because it's just going to ruin it for me. I want to be involved in that world. The author is part of our world. So if I can feel their presence, it's taken me out of the world of the book, and therefore I'm not going to enjoy it. So yeah, overall I just felt everything was really overdone. It's like everything was, signposted. I was being told where I should look. I was being told why I should like things. I was being, constantly things were being described as other things. Like if something's red, that's great. It's red. It doesn't need to be red like blood. It was just excessive, and that really ruined it for me because it just made me so aware of the author. So therefore it took me out of the world and I couldn't enjoy or connect to the characters at all. So yeah, a bit of a disappointing end there. But yeah, on the whole, I'm really glad I did Stand Alone September. If you have read any of the books that I've mentioned in these three parts, please do let me know. Even if you completely disagree with me, I'm always ready to hear other people's opinions. In fact, I sometimes, prefer that because it might change my mind. So yeah, let me know what you thought, and thanks very much for watching.